Hello and welcome once again to a special year on India Today and our special program on books, which is called Booked. And today on Booked, we have a special guest. Joining me today is Aatish Taseer, noted author and writer, whose latest book is a return to self, Excursions in Exile, published by HarperCollins. And it's a book which is both a travelogue and, in a sense, as the author admits, a journey in self-discovery. Aatish, wonderful to have you on the show, on Booked. I want to start by asking you about that word exile that you've used. Ever since in 2019, your Overseas Citizenship of India card was cancelled and you haven't been able to come to the country you grew up in, do you see yourself as now a writer in exile? And is that something that haunts you and tears you apart?
I mean, Rajdeep, there's no other way to think of it, because it started, the losses have started to mount up. The loss of my grandmother, my stepfather had a stroke recently, and this government is absolutely, they have that kind of Trumpian brutality where they never forgive anything. And so the Prime Minister's office is sometimes in touch with my mother. She's a journalist in India. And when she tried to sort of write to say, like, could he even have a tourist visa? It was always met with stone cold silence. And so really, I think that they are pretty unmoving on this position. And so, yes, when you spoke to me last, I remember you said to me, you said, would you still stand by what you wrote? And I said to you, absolutely, I would. And perhaps at that point, I didn't know the price, but now I do know the price. I know the price of people who you love, people who you've grown up with, people who kind of hold your life together, leaving the world and you having no rights of closure, no rights, which adds this kind of element of total absurdity to one's life,
Let me just tell our viewers that Aatish Taseer's mother is the noted columnist and journalist Tavleen Singh. And Aatish's OCI card was cancelled soon after. In 2019, he wrote a headline piece for Time magazine on a cover story on Narendra Modi titled Divider in Chief. And within a few months of that, his Overseas Citizenship of India card was cancelled. You write in the book, and I'm looking at the introduction at the moment, and then we'll come to the other chapters. You say to lose one's country is to know an intimate shame, like being disowned by a parent, turned out of one's home. In a sense, it seems that this sense of loss is something, again, as I said, that is gnawing at you in a way. Explain that, an intimate shame, as you call it, the fact that a country you grew up in, you love, is a country that will not allow you to even come back for your grandmother's funeral.
Well, see, I think I've finally found a way to say this, not as an idea, but in a very personal way. The element of shame, I realize I figured out the mechanism. It feels like a betrayal of the love that I was shown in India. And, my mother had a provocative marriage. She was married out of wedlock with a Pakistani. She came back with a child. This was 1980. My grandparents could have been turned her out of the house. They could have done a million other things to show their displeasure. And instead, all they did was kind of fill me with love, which was the sort of basis of my sense of belonging, that kind of unquestioned sense that this is your country because everyone you love and know and all the bonds of intimacy are all around you. And what this thing did, I realized later, was that it felt like all of that didn't matter, that it was it was a discrediting of that bigness of heart. And so it wasn't even so personal. But I remember at the moment that it happened, I felt so bad for the people who would be so upset to know that somebody they loved and who they'd brought up had been labeled a kind of alien outsider, can't come home.
Because you again write, once India closed behind me in the way it did, the legal reality of not being able to go back, merging with the hatred of Modi's supporters, I felt strangely free. I no longer had to make India seem better than it was. and the need no longer to lie, truth in a word, felt like sustenance. So too did the return of my old curiosities. Have you really, though, been able to put behind you, I come back to it, the events of 2019? Is there still somewhere a sense of anger and hurt that lies in, or has it, as you write, given you a chance to explore once again your curious spirit that takes you across the world? You're in Kathmandu as we speak. Is that something that is almost liberating, the fact that you no longer have to justify in a way what is or is not happening in India?
I mean, it's a funny thing. I think the human heart is full of surprise. It's full of malice. It's full of like unpredictability. And these two things can exist side by side: the grief, the anger, the feelings of loss, but also, yes, like this sense of, at the end of Camus' like Stranger, where he's like, all I want is a mob of people screaming cries of hatred. And because it's such a sort of return of the individual. And in India, we sacrifice so much about individuality in myriad ways for the sake of the group, for the sake of the nation. And there's always there's an economy of shame and honor, and you don't want to ever say anything to make the country look bad. In fact, this whole divider and chief business was because I'd somehow brought shame, and so suddenly when you're shown the door, then all the things that the individual is start to kind of gather in you again. And some of those, of course, do include curiosities. They include the crazy ways in which India is such an opening into East Asia, into West Asia, into the colonial history. There's so much that India enriches you with, that when you live in India, you feel like you're caught between a binary of extreme self-involvement with India, and then this need or this point of approval, which is the West. And everything else in between kind of gets lost. And this book is a little bit of a celebration of that much deeper Indian cosmopolitanism that people like Tagore could touch into, that Allama Iqbal could touch into. And so it's trying to like almost expand that sense of what it is to be Indian, because I am irrefutably an Indian traveler in this book.
Because in a way, while you lived in India, you were part of what is now called the Khan Market gang. In a way seen as this sort of deracinated English-speaking elite that is cut off from the roots of this country, and therefore are almost vulnerable to some kind of targeted attacks for your so-called pseudo-secularism. Is that all behind you? Are you still very much part of the Khan Market gang in a way?
Well, I haven't set foot in Khan Market in 6 years, much that I would love to. But no, it's a very strange thing, because all my fiction up till this point has dealt with the precarity of the English-speaking classes in India. And in a funny way, the books anticipate a man like Modi. Like, I always knew from the moment I came back to India that this was not going to last, that we were living, call it a powder keg, inviting ruin upon ourselves. And then when this thing happened, it made, at that moment, immediate sense to me. And at the same time, I've become somebody who feels that, and this is very much to the essence of this idea of a return to self, is like, this question of return, of trying to wish away parts of your history, be it the English past, be it the Muslim past. It's always a very violent, self-destructive process. It's a kind of fiction, a dangerous fiction, and it won't be achieved. You'll never really get there. And so, this Khan Market set, it's a metonym, or it's a shorthand for basically the legacy of British rule in India. And we have to confront that legacy. That legacy is part of the modern country that we are. And if we don't make our peace with it, we're going to lose a lot of time constantly trying to change names, change language, stewing over history, not moving forward,
I'm going to come in a moment to your journeys of self-discovery, as I called it at the outset, but I just want to know one last time. The fact that you wrote that piece, cover story for Time, calling Narendra Modi a divider-in-chief in 2019, the fact that you subsequently lost your OCI citizenship, cannot come back to India, haven't come back for 6 years, does that leave you feeling regretful or remorseful of anything that you wrote? Do you regret what you wrote? Is there still a lot of anger out there against the way you feel that you were targeted in a very vindictive manner?
Certainly I was targeted in a vindictive manner, and it opened the door for many other people, almost 100 people, to be targeted in similar ways. So that's beyond a shadow of doubt. But no, you can't as a writer regret telling the truth. I mean, you're finished. As a journalist, you can't do that. Do you know? Like, it's better to die in a gulag than to be somebody who has to tailor make your truth either for Mr. Trump or Mr. Erdogan or Mr. Modi.
So there is no sense of regret, but presumably there's an element of anger and hurt. Am I correct?
Certainly. And that anger is not so personal. It's an anger at the abrogation of a very integral and important freedom that our founding fathers in India enshrined, in their wisdom enshrined. So it's not just like, oh, poor me, I can't come home and see my mother. It's like an assault on, and we know how much they've been effective at poisoning the culture of truth telling, of proper journalism, of all of those things that are important in a free society, and they've hobbled them. So the anger is it's not just personal.
Okay, let's move on to then your journeys of self-discovery. You're a writer in exile with all that sense of a little bit of anger, a little bit of hurt, and you travel the world looking in a way to discover the real self, if I may say so. And I want to start with Turkey, because that's where your book starts. And do you see parallels in a way, Aatish, between Turkey under an Erdogan and an India under Modi? You seem to see in your writings clear parallels between Turkey, the Turkey that you visit, and the India that was part of your growing up, or the new India, if I may call it.
I mean, it's almost unbelievable. I mean, the Kemalist secular elite is almost like an exact carbon copy of what you described as the Khan market set. The Anatolian world of what they call green capital, it's this kind of feeling of a heartland that's been culturally rebuffed. It's linked with Ottoman history, so much so that I have a friend who's a businessman in Turkey, and Erdogan said to him, because the mustache is the sign of the man from the country, and he said, you know, Mr. Koch, it won't be long before you too will have a mustache. You know, I mean, that line is straight out of the mouth of Amit Shah. So, you know, it's totally like and Turkey was very early. You know, it was the beginning of my writing career. I was 22 when I went to Turkey, or 23. And at that point, remember, he was the darling of the West. Oh, the modern Islamist democracy and all that. And then within 10 years, he'd taken that dark turn. And so like, it's very, very hard. And I believe my friend Basharat Pir has written a book where he's talked about how much the BJP and the RSS have studied what was done in Turkey as a kind of model for like authoritarianism, for cultural war, for a cultural renaissance, all of these things. So Turkey was like an incredible symmetry that one can't, like, you're not, you know, your eyes are not fooling you. It's just absolutely real.
So in a sense, what you are saying is, in the rise of Islamism in Turkey, getting rid of the old order of the Ataturk version of secularism, and the rise of Hindutva in this country that sort of looks beyond Nehruvian secularism. Is it a class revolution that we are seeing in the garb of faith? What it is a sense of a class war that is now taking, that is seen in the garb of religious nationalism.
Yes, but you must also add historical grievance. That's very important. That feeling that the Ottomans had of having been rulers of the world and having been laid low by the Europeans, that feeling of historical grievance, when Amit Shah talks about 1,000 years of slavery, that historical pain is much more important because the religious aspect is actually very small. You know, religion is the cudgel, but the underlying pain is a historical pain. And it's that's being repurposed or reused. And of course, class does come into it, you know, because you have people who just as they consider in Turkey, and they consider people who were in some ways allied with the foreigner in betraying the spirit of the true country, and that if only the heartland can speak, then once again the country will be great. I mean, it's an incredibly flawed intellectual mechanism, but that's how it works.
Yeah, because you write Hindu nationalists trace a direct line between the foreign occupiers who destroyed the Hindu past, first Muslims, then the British, and India's westernized elite, whom they see as heirs to foreign occupation, still enjoying the privileges of plunder. So it's almost as if you're sort of taking India, you're imagining this imagined past, which you're trying to recreate, this glory of a past civilization, is where you see the commonalities perhaps between the rise of Islamism in Turkey and the rise of Hindutva politics in India.
Right. And it's a very convenient place to put one's shame. One is ashamed because one was conquered. And so why did that happen? Well, of course, there were people on the inside, people who profited, people who betrayed us, people who let in the conqueror. Because it's too hard to think of yourself as a culture having become vulnerable to foreign conquest, because that you would then have to actually look really examine yourself in a very difficult way. So it's much easier to have the scapegoat of the person. And of course, in Europe, that scapegoat has always been the Jew.
You know, because through the book, through your travels, you almost sense that your travels across the world of this self-discovery, the travel becomes a metaphor for also examining and observing shifting strands of society. I mean, you write very evocatively, for example, of the ancient Uzbek cities that you go to, the Samarkands, the Bukharas. So it's almost as if you're trying to connect the past in a way to the present. Would I be right that you're looking
100%.
through the prism of the past to connect yourself to the present?
It's really, thank you. I'm very, very moved to hear that. That's like a very beautiful reading, very sensitive reading of my book. Thank you so much for saying that. You're 100% right. It's and also there's this question of gaze, you know, which comes up again and again in the book of the traveler who's never more himself than when he's against an alien background, but then also this business of seeing and being seen, and how violent and upsetting a business that can be. And so that first opening epigraph from Naipaul, where he says to awaken to history was to see yourself as others saw you, and it was to know a kind of rage. And you know, what's very interesting right now in the world is, like in somewhere like America where I live, that rage is being felt by white people. It's being felt by somebody like J.D. Vance, who feels like somebody like Zoran Mamdani is part of a kind of foreign aristocracy, looking at him as a hillbilly. And so it's like a lot of the questions that come up in the book are part of the friction that we're living through in this particular moment today.
But there's a feeling of melancholia, if I may use that word, that also runs through the book. Almost a sadness as you travel from one country to the other, with a lot of parallels every now and then drawn to India. So a sort of longing for the years that you were here, and that you fear you may no longer, the sights and sounds that you may no longer be able to witness. Am I right? There is a feeling of melancholia, sadness that I see running through the book.
I think you are absolutely right. But I think probably one would add, I think probably what one is dealing with is that the place that you thought was home, or the place that you remember as home, that you can't actually physically revisit it, that even if the OCI was to be given to me and suddenly I could slip across the Nepalese border and hug my mother or my cousins, like, you know, in a sense, like, I think something has gone under. And I think that feeling, people have dealt with that in different societies all the time. You know, people after the war, when it was over, people couldn't return to Europe because they knew that the thing that they'd remembered wouldn't be there in that same way anyway. So I think there is, of course, there is this sort of personal strain of emotion, but there's also this bigger melancholy, of a kind of generalized homelessness.
I want to take you through another country that you fascinatingly write about, which is Spain. And you say on page 87, there are only three societies in the world, Spain, the Balkans, and India, that have seen large swathes of unconverted population despite centuries of Muslim rule. Now,
Yeah.
Spain offers a challenge in terms of the fact that there is a process of assimilation that has taken place over the years, but as well as at times a kind of majoritarian, Christian majoritarian assertion also that takes place. Is that something that you find across the world at the moment, that there are conflicting, including in the United States, where you
Yeah.
live, where there is this process of assimilation over the years, but also a sense of assertion of the so-called original inhabitants?
Well, exactly. I mean, there is in every one of these movements that we're talking about, like hidden in them is this feeling, if only we could get rid of this hated outsider, if only we could take this one element out, we would be great. You know, we feel that in India, it's happening in real time. In America, with immigration, it's happening to some extent. We're seeing like versions of that desire to kind of remove an element so that the true soul of a country can speak again. And Spain is unique in the history of the world because Spain actually did it. You know, they actually, they 500 years before Hitler, they took that hated element. Firstly, they said to them, prove your belonging, you know, prove that you're not a suspicious outsider. Those people made every concession. And the more they made concessions, the more suspicious they became. And finally, they were thrown out. And it's another reason that makes Spain so interesting is that the fanaticism that came with doing that, with excising a part of your society, it poisoned Spain's future. So Spain was on the verge of discovering the Americas. Spain, and the fanaticism followed Spain to the Americas, and in the end, the Spanish enterprise in the Americas was a much smaller affair than, let's say, what Britain ended up doing. And, you know, Spain became a lesser power. And so it's a very, very good example of how that kind of hatred is never worse for the perpetrator than for the victim, or just as worse.
You know, but what is interesting, Aatish, is your ability to maybe use food as a metaphor for exile in Mexico, to using the lotus flower when it comes to Sri Lanka. And you write about Sri Lanka and the everyday routine of this aquatic flower, i.e. the lotus. An entire culture had found spiritual expression. Is this something that you consciously, as you went on your travels, looking for what can define in a way a society, whether it's a Mexico, whether it's a Sri Lanka, whether it's a Spain, looking for little artifacts or nature that in a way, according to you, can sort of explain a society in a more deeper, meaningful manner?
I mean, I would like to say that, but it's so accidental. Do you know, I'm such a like almost a lazy traveler. I come in knowing so little. And like and I do end up reading a lot before and after and things like that. But like I always feel like I'm looking at everything with a kind of first soul or a first pair of eyes. And this question of the lotus, I remember like my editor was like, we're doing something on flowers, and I was like, well, that can't me out. What do I know about flowers? And then she said, the lotus. And then I thought, well, that's the lotus is not a flower, do you know? And everyone knows in India that, like, of course, it's a physical entity, but it's a thing of art, it's a thing of philosophy, it's central in Buddhism. And like literally, I was sitting there and I thought, it's the symbol of the Rajapaksa's party as well as of the Bhajpa. And I was like, it literally had never occurred to me till that moment. And so these things are like, I think that the element of accident and surprise is very much part of travel. And if you're looking at like, I think that kind of that adds a sort of a creative energy, maybe.
Your longest chapter, in a way, is where you go on these pilgrimages through a Mongolia, to a Bolivia, and in a way, to Iran, in discovery, in a way, of different faiths, whether it's Buddhism
Iraq,
or, or Shiite Islam, or Christianity. I just want to understand this. The idea of a pilgrimage is presumably rooted in piety, in the idea that, prayer of in some way, some communion with God, if I may use that word. But you write on page 180, and I'm bringing you into the Indian context of a form of pilgrimage, where you say the intersection of religion and politics canalized into a militarized form of pilgrimage in India, i.e. the Rath Yatra.
Yeah.
So there you are going on a pilgrimage, a journey in this self-discovery through Mongolia, through Bolivia, and you've got, in India, pilgrimage now also being seen as an instrument of political power. Is it both an instrument of power and of this holy communion with God?
I'm so glad you mentioned. I'd literally forgotten that line. But, the Crusaders thought of themselves first and foremost as pilgrims. They thought they were going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and then began, like, obviously, this idea of war and reconquering and going again and again. And so this element of people setting out from home, which is always a very disruptive feature. We today live with modern tourism, and modern tourism is a kind of later form of pilgrimage, but we've become accustomed to leaving home. But in the old days, leaving home for many reasons was considered like a radical act. So many people leaving home for a religious journey was a very combustible affair. And it was so that ability of that kind of religious journey to acquire the atmosphere of a carnival, to acquire a darkness, to become a locus of violence, to be like, it is part of the kind of the shadow side of pilgrimage. And of course, like, again, like it suddenly dawned on me because of this word. We use, in India, we use it so interestingly, like musafir, you see a sort of caravanserai, a moonless night. But when you say yatra, immediately pilgrimage comes to mind. And Advani's Rath Yatra was a historical journey where the objective was not to go to a holy place, but it was to commit an act of violence, of reclamation. It was like a modern day crusade.
So in a sense, is the intersection of religion and politics almost inevitable in a form when across the world? Or do you believe you have those who go on pilgrims with a genuine sense of faith and piety, and those who go simply for political power, that they both coexist?
There's this beautiful line in Octavio Paz where he says the conversion of culture into religion always ends with the conversion of religion into politics. And I think that, like, I think what we are seeing today is extremely politicized forms of religion. I mean, the idea that an utter disbeliever like Trump should be a figure of the evangelical. My husband is from the evangelical South. These women, like, you can't say a bad word around them, and they didn't vote for him because the idea of somebody talking about his penis on television was anathema to them. But they were the only 3 evangelical women who didn't vote for Trump, so everyone else did. And so similarly, like, I think in many societies, we're accepting these very politicized, very militarized forms of religion, and one can question how much of the religious element or how much of the spiritual element is even left, but nobody can question how useful, or how like what a perfect instrument this is for the will to power.
Because you also, of course, write about how communism destroyed many of these great ancient religions and civilizations, be it in Mongolia in particular, which you write about. But you're in Nepal, ironically, because I sensed in the book that on your various pilgrimages in Buddhism, you seem to discover a quiet comfort, a cycle of erasure and a return of Buddhism post-communism, for example, in Mongolia. Is there a sense that eventually you do return to religion in its purer form, even after going through periods where religion is either erased or is used for political power?
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd thing. I'm such a godless creature myself, and then I keep circling around religions, and I have been since I started writing. I arrived kind of faithless in Mecca. I think that I think what I am very moved by is that in pilgrimage, for instance, there's this idea of a journey in and a journey out, and the journey out is like a journey of human beings. It's Chaucer, it's bawdy jokes in a pub, it's somebody going to pilgrimage to commemorate their dead father. And so this kind of human side of religion, before it's passed through the filter of religion, has a very powerful effect on me as a writer. And I guess I'm drawn to those narratives. Like even in India, I'm so I was so in sympathy with the people who believed in Modi, even when I realized how wrong probably Modi would be as an answer. And that emotion before it becomes faith, before it becomes politics, is such a big human emotion. And it's got to do with, like, I don't know, making livelihoods, making families, finding your way in the world, confidence. And so these things are like that. I guess it's a very, very effective way to come near a very raw human side of things. And yeah.
But pilgrimage, as you write, is a great leveler. Do you believe it's reconciled your conflicting worlds? One moment in New York, next moment in Nepal, a third day in Najaf or Karbala. Have you reconciled these conflicting worlds at all? Have you reconciled also to the fact that here you are, born of a Pakistani father who was assassinated, a Sikh mother? These various worlds, India and Pakistan today, at war in a sense with each other, where even the cricketers won't shake hands. These are all very conflicting worlds. Have you reconciled then eventually to your sexuality, to the way you've had to sort of live your life over the last 6 years? Has that been easy? Because again, yes, go ahead.
I'm laughing because my great error was ever to even imagine that wholeness or reconciliation was possible. I think that one of the things that you learn, it's like, you've opened your laptop and you have 15 windows open and you think, oh, how nice it would be to have only one. But actually, you have to have them all open at the same time and live with that discomfort. And I think people increasingly who have to balance multiple societies in their head, who have to who don't live in a place where they don't have to ever think about another place. Everyone is in these situations of liminality, of feeling themselves betwixt and between. And resolution is not well, I'm done now, let's go home. Resolution is like somehow like keeping all the windows open, and for those windows open to be a source of like intellectual curiosity, to be a source of richness, to actually live with contradiction. Because I think that the great danger with the politics of now is the fear of contradiction, and the sort of almost zeal with which people wish to simplify what can only be simplified at the cost of its destruction.
Tell me, therefore, as we conclude, do you have a message for Prime Minister Modi? We started off with him. Do you have a message at the end of the day? Is it that
this is such a
I'm in
cruel
Nepal,
question, really?
just allow me to cross the border, give me an Aadhaar card? Or do you have a message? Do you have a message for the Prime Minister of India who you called a divider-in-chief in 2019? Would you, if you had Mr. Modi in front of you, what would you tell him?
Absolutely. I would look through him like as if I was looking through, a complete somebody who had a non-entity. Writers do not have to be answerable to politics in that way. I don't have a message for him. I don't do what he does. I wish him well. I wish India well, but I will not have him make a petitioner out of me. I'm not going to do it.
You're saying that you won't allow him to make a petition. You won't petition Prime Minister Modi. Where are you happiest though today? Are you happier today in a Trump-led America?
I mean,
Or would you still prefer the comfort of your home in a Modi's India?
I mean, Rajdeep, look at this world. We're like 1939, but there are no good guys. I mean, from which frying pan into which fire are you going to jump? Like, I mean, we're holding out. We're holding out as best one can in America. We're holding out, I think, in Europe. Like, I'm even more afraid because like the dam hasn't fully burst, but like, but there's no place that's safe. There are maybe islands of safety, but there's the idea of a national world in which, you could break into the free world, like that whole notion has broken down. It doesn't exist in space and time. We're much more in isolates and kind of hoping that the sort of seawall will hold.
Does that make it more difficult to write honestly and freely in your view because of the rise of authoritarianism or majoritarianism? Does that make it much more difficult, or does it in a sense almost give the writer the opportunity to observe as you do through your book and see the world very differently?
I mean, I think if you're the kind of writer that I am, which is a political writer in some ways, or very connected with culture, history, politics, there's a lot to write about for sure. And it's I think that what the writer can do against the politician is not that he takes on the politics head on, but he can change the lens. And in changing the lens, agency can flow back to people who are made by the authoritarian to feel powerless, or made to feel that everything is kind of stacked against them. So I think that the writer remains, in that sense, a very powerful figure. And remember, that's one of the reasons why the tyrant, in his wisdom, always knows that the writer is the threat. Why snuff out someone so small? Like, there's this lovely share of Manto's Manto's quoting Ghalib, where he says, लरसता है दिल मेरा ज़हमत महरे दरख्शां पर मैं हूँ वो कतरा शबनम जो हो खारे बियामा पर. I'm like that drop of dew on a thorn in a wilderness, and I'm like, I tremble that the sun is taking all this effort to destroy me, and so I don't think that, like, yeah, I think that the writer is probably energized by a moment like this.
I'm going to leave it there, Aatish. It's been fascinating talking to you. I want to
You
say this
too.
on a personal note. I do hope that sooner rather than later you're able to visit the land which you grew up in and which you still presumably would like to call home, and that despite all that's happened, that we can see you in this part of the world. I just want to remind our viewers, A Return to Self, Excursions in Exile, a HarperCollins publication of Aatish Taseer's new book. Aatish, pleasure talking to you. Wish you well.
Thank you. If you do run into him, put in a good word for me.
Yeah, you want me to do the petitioning. I am not going to do any petitioning. I am dubbed, by the way, an anti-national, as many are. And if you were probably, and those who are listening to this interview will probably see this as an interview between two anti-nationals, one who cannot come to India and one who lives in India but is dubbed an anti-national.
Thank you so much, Rajdeep. It was lovely to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Aatish Taseer joining me there on this very special edition of Booked. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Namaskar. Keep reading. It's a good way to live.